Hi guys, so I am here today to tell you all about the best films that I watched in 2017. Much like with my best books I read in 2017, these films did not necessarily come out in 2017. In fact, some of them came out quite a long time before 2017, but a few did come out that year. They are just simply the films that I watched for the first time in 2017 and that really stood out to me, that I would highly recommend everybody watch, that I will most certainly be rewatching in the future, and that I got a lot from. So without further ado, let's get into the films. So these films aren't in order of my favourites or even in the order of my watching them, but I think I might start with the ones I saw in the cinema first and particularly enjoyed, and then move on to the ones that I watched at home. So the first few did come out in 2017, and I'm going to start with Logan. This is an X-Men film. It is part of the Marvel universe, although it is strikingly different in many ways. Now, I have been a fan of X-Men since I was very young. I used to love the cartoon show on the television. I've dabbled in the comic books over the years and I really like all of the films, so I was obviously going to see Logan in the cinema. It is harrowing though. It is definitely one of the most emotional X-Men films. It also focuses on Wolverine, as you might be able to tell from the title, Logan, and do not set yourself up for this film with the previous two Wolverine films in mind, which I hated, particularly the first one. That was an atrocity to the X-Men legacy. But I think we've all wiped that from our minds and we can move on now. So Logan is set in 2029 and it follows Charles Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart of course, and Logan or Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman. Both actors I absolutely adore. All of the other X-Men, as far as we know, are now gone. Mutants are not tolerated by society, and Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart are living kind of as outcasts. And it plays on a lot of really serious themes in a really in-depth way, in a way that a lot of the other X-Men films didn't necessarily do. We particularly deal with aging and dementia. Charles Xavier is sort of dealing with dementia, and obviously as a mutant with telepathic powers, this really affects his powers and makes him quite dangerous. Both characters are really struggling, and a young mutant girl comes into their life, and I will say no more because it's obviously about how her life affects their lives and kind of the future of mutant kind and what were the X-Men, and it's really emotional is all I can say. It's a really emotional story. You will most likely cry during this film, and it has an amazing soundtrack, which is always a massive bonus in a film for me. So all in all, loved this film. I have 3 more cinematic films, and the next one is Hidden Figures. Now, I'm sure those of you who have already seen Hidden Figures are already deeply in love with it and know exactly why I like it so much. It is such a great film. It follows the true story of 3 women working at NASA in the 1960s, and are all black women. Their job is that of computers, so they do calculations for different parts of NASA in aid of the space program and getting people into space and objects into space and all of that kind of stuff. And it's about the kind of massive role that these women, amongst other women, played that has been overlooked because of their sex and their race, and sort of reclaiming that legacy. And it's such a well done film. It's just really well acted. It's really serious but also quite upbeat. It just really has you involved in the story, and it just, for me, was just really perfect, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think it's worth all of the hype, and if you haven't seen it already, I would highly recommend you do. The next film is a sequel, and I think it's the most recent film that I've seen that's on this list, and that is Paddington 2. But I could not leave Paddington 2 off of this list. Paddington 1 was a feat of cinematic wonder. You might not think Paddington Bear is going to be an amazing film, but it doesn't matter how old you are, I'm telling you, Paddington is for you. It is for all ages, children and adults alike. It is such a wonderful story, and I was a little apprehensive about Paddington 2, you know, sequels can kind of bomb, but in many ways, Paddington 2 was almost better than Paddington 1. Some way, somehow, they did it. They nailed it on the head. It was just perfection. So heartwarming. Makes you well up at little points, but just makes you feel really happy throughout. Paddington Bear is, of course, the classic children's book character, a small bear from darkest Peru who finds himself in London living with an English family. Now we get an all-star cast in Paddington 2, even more than in Paddington 1. We have the addition of Hugh Grant, Brendan Gleeson, and many others, all of whom do fantastic jobs. I think it's one of my favourite films I've seen Hugh Grant in a few years. He was fabulous in this film, and all in all, it just worked. It was perfect. Lastly, for films I saw in the cinema, I have to mention Beauty and the Beast, the Disney live-action remake of the classic cartoon Beauty and the Beast that many of us know and love. On that topic, Beauty and the Beast is not one of my favourite Disney cartoons. It's not even in my top 5. I don't even think it's in my top 10. That's a whole other discussion for another video if you want to hear about my favourite Disney films. I like it, but it's just never been one of my favourites. And I loved the live action remake of Beauty and the Beast. I loved it more than the cartoon. As somebody who's not necessarily a die-hard Beauty and the Beast fan, I just thought it added so many new levels and layers to the story and brought it to life in a much more real and capturing way for me than the original necessarily did. I adored it. It of course stars Emma Watson and Dan Stephen in the lead roles, but we also have various different actors like Ewan McGregor and Ian McKellen, etc, etc, playing fantastic well-known roles and doing an excellent spot-on job of them. There was the addition of some new songs, some new scenes, and for me it all just tied together perfectly, and I was completely blown away in a way I was not expecting to be. But beyond the 27 releases, let's move on to films that I watched in 2017 that may have come out long before, but that I adored. Now the first one, I don't want to say it's my favourite film of the year, but it's high up there, and that is The Angel's Share. This is a film that was directed by Ken Loach and came out in 2012. If you are familiar with Ken Loach, you might know that a lot of his films are very, very dark, and although this one definitely deals with quite serious themes and people going through struggles in their lives, it's a comedy. It is an uplifting, you know, cheerful film at the end of the day, and it really gives you joy and will make you laugh. But it also deals with like real life, because it's a really good combination of all of those different things that I really, really like in a film and often create some of my favourite films. It's set in Scotland. The characters are based in Glasgow, but we go to Edinburgh, we go to the Highlands, all over the shop. So if you've ever lived or been to Scotland, it's such a nice film for seeing places you're familiar with. As somebody that's from Edinburgh, spent a lot of time in Glasgow, has gone to Highlands, etc. I really enjoy that. I like seeing scenes I'm familiar with. The story itself follows a young guy doing his community payback instead of going to prison, and he gets friendly with one of the guards on his community service and gets introduced to whiskey and all of the wonders of whiskey and training your palate to pick up all the different nuances of a good whiskey. And then him and the rest of his pals learn a little bit more about whiskey. They go to a whiskey distillery and they learn about the Angel's Share, which is the portion of whiskey that disappears whilst in the casket. It essentially evaporates, and it's often known as the Angel's Share. And this guy and his friends decide that they are going to steal the Angel's Share of a super, super expensive whiskey to help them get a bit of a start in life, because, you know, a few bottles of this whiskey that's just been put on the market would get them quite a bit of money. And it's about that. It's about that story. It's about this young guy and his relationships and what brought him to this point in his life, and about him and the other characters going after this Angel's Share of the whiskey. Now, one of the things Ken Loach is quite well known for is picking amateur actors for his films, and the actors in this film are spectacular. Every single one of them nails their performance, and it is such a pleasure to watch them. It is such a good film. Again, one of my absolute favourites, and would definitely suggest you all give it a watch. But next up is a film that's quite a bit older. It came out in 1969, and it is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, starring Robert Redford and Paul Newman. And I have to say, Paul Newman's performance in this is one of my favourite acting performances and characters of a film of 2017. It was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. This is a film that follows the infamous Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, who were real robbers in the United States in the late 1800s. And it's a fictionalised version of their story together, and it's just brilliant. I don't know what I thought this film was going to be, but it wasn't what I expected. It's quite a comical film. It's very witty and tongue-in-cheek, and it has a really good sense of humour about it, but it also has some serious moments, you know, particularly as the story escalates. And our two robbers have basically been put at the top of a most wanted list, and some of the most well-trained sort of bounty hunters have been sent after them with the job of killing them no matter what. So they're trying to escape this, and it is almost impossible because they are just being endlessly chased. And both them and the Sundance Kid's girlfriend Etta Place just have to flee, and they, you know, get up to all sorts and go robbing elsewhere. They go to South America, all over the shop, but it's just so well done. I just couldn't believe I hadn't seen this film yet and how good it really was, so I'm really glad that I finally watched that in 2017. And next up, for an old classic that you probably have already heard of, but like me might not have gotten around to watching yet, that is In the Heat of the Night, starring Sidney Poitier. This film came out in 1967, and it is a crime film that also deals a lot with race tensions in America during this time. So Sidney Poitier's character is a detective named Virgil Tibbs, and he finds himself in a town on the same night that a murder takes place. Instantly, he is stopped on his way to the train station and arrested for the murder simply because he is black. Very quickly though, they find out that he is also a police detective from outside of Mississippi, pretty high up, and the police in Mississippi end up asking for his help. So together they are solving this murder mystery, but at the same time there's a lot of tension felt between the white police officer and Sidney Poitier's character, as well as some aggressive, potentially dangerous racism on the parts of other people in this town. And it is a wonderful film. It is so well done. I had actually never seen a Sidney Poitier film until 2017, but I watched both In the Heat of the Night and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, both of which I actually loved, so I'd recommend checking out both of these films, but I thought I would mention In the Heat of the Night in particular. My next film is also from the 1960s. I actually watched a lot of films from around this period in 2017, mostly with my parents. We were kind of watching a lot of their favourite films throughout the year, and the next one is one of my mum's all-time favourites, and it is Dr. Strangelove. This came out in 1964. It was directed by Stanley Kubrick and stars Peter Sellers, who you might know better from The Pink Panther. And of all the films I watched last year, I have to say that that one was potentially the most relevant, which is slightly disturbing given it that it came out in the 1960s. This film is all about nuclear war and nuclear weapons. It is a satirical, political, black comedic film. So if you like any of those things, it's a must watch, and it deals with a world in which somebody decides that they are going to set off the nuclear bombs in America. We then follow all of the different people high up in the Pentagon and the American government as they are discussing what should we do in their little secret meetings, basically discussing what's best for them. And it is beyond disturbing, especially given how believable it is. And obviously this film came out during the Cold War, so it was very much inspired by the nuclear disarmament and nuclear war discussion going on at that time. But given how prevalent nuclear weapons and nuclear war have been in our news in the past few months and years, it just felt so current, and that was what was all the more disturbing about it. It will make you laugh, but inside you'll kind of been crying, thinking, this could happen. And obviously it points out a lot of the dangers of nuclear weapons and how easy it is really for like a few or even a single person to kind of start the end of the world. And yeah, one I would definitely recommend you all watch. But I think I'm going to end this list here. I watched a lot of films in 2017, a lot of good ones, many that just didn't quite make the cut of this list, but that I would still recommend. If you want to hear about some other films that I watched in the year, I did do one film wrap up review video during the year that you can hear about some of the other films I watched and my thoughts on them, good and bad. And I also have a old video that I did about some of my favourite films, but if you guys are interested I might do a new video on my top 10 favourite films of all time, so let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. If you've seen any of these films, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've ever considered watching any of these films, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've never heard of these films but are now intrigued by them, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's chat about films for a little bit of a change, shall we? And in fact, what were the best films that you watched in 2017? That's what I'd love to know. But until next time guys, happy viewing, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!